Welcome to Pragati Vichar Literature Festival 2023, organized by Frontless Media, and this year's theme is Taking Humanity Forward. So today we all are present here to celebrate for the love for the literature and discuss the pivotal subject matters which are prevailing in society and establish engaging conversation with your favorite authors and poets. So today's session theme is poetry, and under this we have topic Let Emotions Speak. And we have a very lovely guest with us today. So on panel, first we have Abhay, second we have Mitali Chakravarty, and last but not the least we have Mahua. We're immensely glad to have all of you on board today for the PVLF 2023. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having
Thank
us.
you so much for having us here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. So let us start with introduction. First with Abhay. Abhay is the author of memoir and 9 poetry collection, including The Magic of Madagascar, and
It's the magic of Madagascar.
Madagascar. Thank you. And Alphabets of Latin America, The Eight-Eyed Lord of Kathmandu, and The Seduction of Delhi. He is the editor of Capitals, New Brazilian Poems, Great Indian Poems, and the Bloomsbury Book of Great Indian Love Poems. He received the Star Literary Award in 2013 and was invited to record his poems at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. in 2018. His poem song Earth and Anthem has been translated over 120 global languages and is performed across the globe. And he has published his book Ritu Samra Kalidasa, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
translation of
thank you.
Ritu.
So, moving ahead, we have Mitali Chakravarty. Mitali Chakravarty started her professional career as a journalist in the Times of India. Her bylines have appeared in The Statesman, The Times of India, The Hindustan Times, The Pioneer, The Daily Star, and more journals. Some of her writing has been translated to Nepali, Persian, and German. She also translates from Bengali to English, and she has published a humorous book of essays on living in China, where she spent 8 years in the land of dragons, which has been updated and serialized in a journal on a weekly basis. She has recently published her poetry anthology, Mona Lisa No Longer Smile. Welcome, ma'am. So last but not the least, we have Mahua who was a multiple award-winning poet based out of Hyderabad. She has co-authored more than 70 anthologies. She is currently editing anthology I Am a Woman, a dedication to Kamala Das, and her poems are widely published and as well as accepted both nationally and internationally. She was recently invited as a distinguished guest in Telangana Poetry Festival, where she spoke about the relevance of poetry in a contemporary society. So thank you all of you for joining us. So as I mentioned that today we'll be talking about poetry and our topic is let emotion speak to you. Before delve into the conversation, I would like to ask Mitali ma'am what inspired you to compile the poems of the world-renowned poets in your book Mona Lisa No Longer Smiles, and how did you approach this subject and what was the research process for this book as well?
Okay, that's Mona Lisa No Longer Smiles, and it has more than poetry. It is an anthology which features poetry, prose in different forms. It has conversations, it has essays, it has short stories, it has discussions, so a whole bunch of things. Poetry is a part of it, and perhaps the best way to answer your question is if I read out the 5 line limerick that is not funny but serious, despite the connotations given to it that it's a folk form and it's supposed to be non-serious. I have summed up the whole anthology's ideas and the idea with which I run the Borderless Journal, my online journal, in these 5 lines. Figments caught straying in whispers of a dream weave together till they form a visible stream, filling a void with voices that sing, with freedom and impunity ring, giving credence to a distant imagined realm. So borderless is exactly that. It gives, we collect thoughts, borderless, Mona Lisa, we collect thoughts and start a dialogue. We start a dialogue. Mona Lisa No Longer Smiles is actually an attempt to catch stray strands of thoughts, create a dialogue on contemporary issues and conflicts, and find a resolution through love. And this is something Radha Chakravarty spoke of in our launch. She said that the pieces speak to each other. So you see, when we pick up a poetry piece, it would speak to another piece, and the conversations or essays could be responding back with poetry too on similar issues. So at the end of the book, you are listening to a dialogue. So for instance, I started the introduction with a poem because that gives the full gist of the novel, that, we are basically collecting thoughts. So who gives the thought? You never know. Like we have the Persian poet Bijan Nachti, translated by Dawood Jalili, writing a poem on bellies full, doll full of TNT, which explodes in the face of children. And you have Michael Birch from US writing of the same issues, war and the problems it causes. And you have from the real world, Lesia Bakun. She is a Ukrainian refugee. So in fact, I believe my publisher told me that we are the first book in India to carry a Ukrainian refugee interview. We have that too. So she's written a poem while in hiding and on the run. So you see, she's a beginner. Natsi is an established voice. And, Michael is coming up, you can say. Similarly, we have Balochi poet Akbar Barakzai, who actually turned down the the Pakistan Academy Award because he felt, we have an interview of him in our journal, but not in the book. It's coming out with the Pakistan Sahitya Academy, in any case, the interview. So he speaks of the power of words, how to express. And you find that vibrancy in Arundhati's poem, Catabolic Women, where the woman takes up the word and becomes, she has no fear. And similarly, you will find the same tones in Meenakshi Malhotra's essay on women, where she talks of Radhika Mudupalan's poetry. Radhika, this woman is, Radhika Santavanam. It's a poem called Radhika Santavanam, and it was written way back in the 18th century by a woman called Mudupalani. So she's talking of that. So, the dialogue is going on. And then you will have Zora, the essay of a maidservant who was killed around the same time as George Floyd in Pakistan. Aisha Baki talks of that. She's a Pakistani writer. Then you would have, let's say now Korean. This guy talks of social gaps. He writes his poetry and translates. And interestingly, he wrote a poem on Shanti Niketan, So Nandini, he's very fond of Tagore. Nandini, where he talks of social gaps and, what he sees, and he just hopes Nandini gets married and she doesn't have to give a dowry and she's happy. The same theme is taken up later by Aditya Shankar, and it's taken up in a number of stories, in a number of other essays, and so on and so forth. Then you would have, let's say on the pandemic, you have Rice and Bibek. Rice does it through humor. Rice Hughes, he's a Welsh poet. He writes regularly for us, and he's on my board too. So he does this thing. And then Bibek Adhikari is a newcomer, probably around your age or maybe little older. So he's written on the pandemic. So it's different perspectives. One is laughing, dealing with it with laughter. The other one is just talking of the condition and feeling sad. So it's basically a dialogue. And we have an essay later by Keith Lyons from New Zealand, who talks of how this woman comes up during the pandemic, and she, she kind of looked after 30,000 kids, this Tibetan woman. So in China, she went back to China and opened a school and all that. So it's a fantastic essay, but he's taking on that theme. She died of COVID. So, it kind of flows through in all forms. So the whole thing is that, you could call the whole book, like a conversation, or you can talk of it as a long poem that's talking of this, but it has conversations, essays, stories, everything. For instance, the ultimate, this thing is Gautam Ghosh's interview, where he talks of healing with love. He quotes Lalon, but mind you, Lalon has also taken up social gaps. In one of the translations from a book he published, it says, "What was your caste when you came here? What caste did you take on arrival, dear? What would be your caste when it's time to go? Ponder and tell me if you know." This is a translation of Lalon, but Lalon is basically a person who heals. He was around Tagore's time and Tagore took him up. So again, Tagore is we have a discussion on Tagore. I'll talk of that later in context. But basically, it's just that. So it's a whole conversation, and it is to make people think and make people respond in whatever form they want. We even do paintings at times. So it is basically to get people to respond. So to world crisis and spread the world so that all of us work towards creating a better future for our kids. So it's basically that. I'm a mother, and you read out my bio from my website, my journal, but I'm basically a mother, and I look after my kids, and here I'm just making a better world for them. So MNLS is basically an attempt at doing that. Thank you for giving MNLS an opportunity here. Does that answer your question, or do you?
Yes, and thank you so much, Mitali, ma'am. So moving ahead, we have Abhay. So, sir, sorry to mention that I've mentioned you're author of this book, Ritu Samra Kalidasa, but you are a translator. So, how has translating Kalidasa's poems in Ritu Samra influenced or affected your poetry, journey or a poetry writing career? And yes, and it's your second book that you have translated on Kalidasa's poems. You are on mute, sir.
Thank you, Jyotsna, for having me here. I'm delighted to be with you this morning. Well, Kalidasa's Ritu Samhara was the second book which I translated. The first one was Meghdut, the Cloud Messenger. And the translation I was doing was to write my own book, to rewrite Meghdut and to rewrite Ritu Samhar. And I managed to do that through Monsoon, which was published in March this year by Sahitya Academy. And Monsoon is a poem. It's one poem actually of 150 stanzas, which begins in Madagascar. As many who study geography know, that monsoon originates in a place called Mascarene High in the Indian Ocean near Madagascar. And then the poem follows the path of the monsoon as the monsoon travels from Madagascar to Mauritius to Reunion to Seychelles, Comoros, Maldives, Sri Lanka. And once it is there, it bifurcates into two arms. One goes towards the Western Ghats and goes up all the way up to Delhi, and the other one moves towards the Andaman and Nicobar Islands and goes further north to Kolkata and Siliguri and to the Himalayas and Nepal, Bhutan, and then it bifurcates into two arms. One moves on the left side, which goes towards Delhi, and meets the other arm, which came via the Western Ghats. And these two arms then travel to Kashmir and the Himalayas. So this is the path of the monsoon. And through this poem, I have described, the flora and fauna, the cuisine, monuments, uh, languages. So this poem is a way to kind of visit, all these places. So I have used Kalidasa's, technique of, it's called Dut Kavya. And so a person like as in Meghdut, there is Yaksha who has been banished from the mythical kingdom of Alkapuri to the central India. And he was recently married, and he writes a letter. He asks the cloud to carry his message to his beloved, in his wife actually, in Alkapuri, which is near Kailas. And so I've used the same technique, and I wrote it during the pandemic. And it's so someone in Madagascar asks the monsoon to take a message actually, and deliver it to his beloved in Kashmir, in Srinagar. And on the way, whatever monsoon witnesses, the colors, sounds, aroma, everything, sights. So to take it to his beloved. So this could only happen because I read and translated Meghdut and Ritu Samhar. So this monsoon is a combination of both Meghdut and Ritu Samhar. Ritu Samhar is such a beautiful book of description of life in seasons, and not only life of humans but also animals and plants and so on. So what Kalidasa does, that he makes everything alive. He makes rivers alive, he makes clouds alive, they become persons. And so I have tried to do that in monsoon. And mm, and this book, I just want to share that this book has been, chosen uh, as to study at Harvard University, as a book, which is an example of how literature and climate change uh, change how literature and environment actually interact. So this is this is monsoon, and it's been widely reviewed actually in Indian media and global, in global media. And I'm so happy that I was in Madagascar, and I could translate Kalidas. And I've written also about his work. I mean, calling him as the a contemporary, an eco poet whose work resonates so well with contemporary times, when we face the triple crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and environmental pollution.
Thank you, Abhay sir, and congratulations for the work. So
Thank you.
moving ahead, Mahua ma'am, that you are working on your another compilation called I Am Woman. Please tell us about your book and how did you decide to compose it in the first place?
First of all, thank you very much, Josna, for having me here. It's really great to share the virtual space with Mitali ma'am and Abhay sir. So thank you very much. So this book is a dedication to Kamla Suraya Das. Kamla Das, as we all know, is the mother of modern Indian English poetry. And her words have captivated and inspired me like nobody else. She was a feminist in the true sense of the term and an author much ahead of her times, So most of her literary works addresses inequality and injustice stemming from gender-based discrimination and prejudice against women entrenched in the traditional society. And her works reveal the oppression that women had to face, right? And she made a vehement appeal for a new social order. And of course, she wanted to create a free space for women where they can voice their opinions, a place where they can, they are not subjugated by misogyny, so to say. And in fact, if I ask you, even after 100 years, has the picture changed? The answer is no, right? So it is a burning problem even in this so-called, modern society. And yes, the severity has been reduced to a great extent, I would say, but the core values of people, the mindset at the root, didn't really change completely. And if we go into the root cause of most of the social problems, like if for example rape or physical abuse or dowry harassment, so on and so forth, we'll be able to see that all these behaviors are based on age old belief that men are superior to women. So I feel it's high time that the primitive mindset gets a total makeover, and I believe that we poets have the potential to kind of create, develop, and implement positive changes through our mighty pen. At least we can attempt to do that. So this book is an attempt to bring together some of the eminent as well as some budding poets who have contributed their poetic voice to Kamla Das, and they have dedicated their poetic voice to Kamla Das, and this book is a very humble attempt at amplifying Kamla Das's voice, her thoughts, her ideologies. And, it's kind of a reminder, the dire need to voice our opinions against the patriarchal narrative. So, yes, behind the book.
Thank you, Mahua ma'am. Thank you for sharing your book and the idea behind it. So my next question to all of you, that significant is the role of emotional expression in any poetry? And since we are talking emotions today, so I would like to start with Mitali ma'am.
Okay, for me, I think emotion is central to all poetry, in my experience. Emotions recollected in tranquility. That's Wordsworth for you. And even early, could you really exist without emotions? And could you really write without emotions? Abhay was just talking of how Ritu Samvara and Meghdut inspired him to create his own poem, and he sees Kalidasa as a contemporary. I do the same for Tagore, So it is really not, I translate on my website, and I learned to write poetry from Tagore in that sense. When you translate, you learn. So emotion is, poetry touches the heart, and you just think of it, it has to be worked on. If you just write down and send it and say, I will not change it, then it may not have the impact you intend. There are poems you have to take months or years over to write. I do write myself, so I do know that sometimes a poem can take 6 months or a year to finish, even if it's just, 1 page or 2 pages. It could take a very long time before you feel it's okay. So it's that is there. On the other thing that I think impacts emotions in poetry is when you go through acute stress situations. This lady, Lesia Bakun, the refugee from Ukraine, who we interviewed and whose poetry I'm carrying, she had actually done a poem for me sent some poetry earlier. And because I like to gather thoughts from all over the world, I published her. It was nothing extraordinary. It was a poem. But when she sent me from her bunker in Ukraine, the poetry she turned out, I am Kharkiv. I'll just read out a bit of it to you. You will see the power of her poem. It is absolutely amazing. So just a little bit. I am Kharkiv. I am Volnovakha. I am Kiev. I am the blocked Mariupol on the verge of humanitarian catastrophe. I'm completely destroyed city of Shastya. That is literally translated as happiness, where people have to sit in the bomb shelters because nothing else is preserved. The Russian troops are not letting them out. I am Ukraine. I'm a fighter. I'm a refugee in my own country. What's in the minds of Russians? 9 years ago, I was in Strasbourg. Anyway, it's a long poem, but At the end, she says, I wish you survival, health, and the close sky above you, because they are constantly getting bombed. Yesterday, also, we saw bombing in, in Ukraine. So the power of emotions, then, when she's putting it down, it becomes a very powerful poem. And maybe it doesn't need so much rework, because she actually sent it to me very early while on the run itself. I mean, I followed her journey through the run, and right now she's in Norway, and she's not well. She's put on weight. I mean, there are a lot of issues. There's a lot of sadness in her face. So it's really amazing what this can do for you. So I think Mahua will understand that to a point, because when you have the first time I published a poem online was when an 8-year-old girl was raped. And that was actually translated to German, read out in a pen forum. It was actually in Austria pen, and then it was, I think it's been republished in another American forum. It just takes up. But that was something I responded with, just, the heart bursting out. So you have that kind of poetry. It's not always that it needs reworking, but some amount of reworking. So but sometimes you do need to do what Wordsworth says, recollect in tranquility. So these are all different experiences. So I think emotions and poetry cannot be separated.
True. Very true.
I absolutely agree with you. So moving ahead, Abhay sir, what's your take on this?
About feeling, poetry is about feeling. So you can have information, you can have different things in prose, but poetry is basically about feelings. It's how you express yourself, your emotions. That's what poetry is. So um, so like for example, when I was writing monsoon, I'll focus on monsoon. So and also so so it's very important to feel it, otherwise you won't be able to write it. And that's why, poets are like hopeless people who are like who fall in love all the time, and very easily, and get heartbreaks, and go through various poets are very sensitive people. One thing which is there is sensitivity. It's ability to feel others. Express oneself, as well as able to empathize with others. Have very high emotional intelligence. So that's so here are some lines. For example, monsoon begins with this: I wake up with your thoughts, your fragrance reaching me all the way from the Himalayas to the island of Madagascar, brought by monsoon from the blessed Himalayan valley to the hills of Antananarivo on its return journey. I dream of you every night. The shimmering dawn snatches my dreams, but the morning breeze comes whispering your name, permeating my being with your thoughts, only your thoughts, my love. Uh, then I was, my new poem is called Celestial, which is also, uh, uh, a love poem. But in that poem, the person on earth is looking for his love in, or her love in, the stars and the constellations, and then travels through all these 88 constellations in the sky, visible from earth, and mm, and tries to find her. And this poem begins with these lines, uh, uh, awake all night, I savor starlight, I look at the Orion's belt, and all my sorrows melt, uh, and so on. So it takes you to all the constellations, but then it's all about emotions. how you kind of connect the constellations. They are like far away and in the sky. You cannot touch them, but you can see them at a clear sky, and you can like project your emotions on them. You know, so this is how poetry is made. You know, you use various poetic devices to express those emotions. Also, that poetry is expression of emotions, but it's it's not raw emotions. You know, it's not direct emotions, as Emily Dickinson says, tell it but tell it slant. And that's how you use metaphors to express your emotions. It's controlled emotions, you know. And you use technique to do that. It's not just that you can say anything, and that's not poetry. So so it's using poetic devices, you know, using uh, figures of speech. Metaphor is one of them. And today I was reading, on Twitter that how Amazon was named, you know, the company, and how metaphors are used to kind of amplify or multiply something, you know. So so of course, I mean, poetry is expression of emotions, you know, expression of feelings, but uh, but in a way which uses poetic devices, and which makes it, it's like a poetry is like lensing, you know. It's like how you have the sunlight, that's the emotions, you know. And how you use a lens to kind of bend that light so it becomes impactful. And you know, it starts burning. I mean, burning is not the right metaphor, but it becomes something very, very powerful. So that's what poetry
Just want
is.
to say one thing, Abhay. We have an essay by Bijan Nathji on perspectives in poetry in my collection, and he says exactly the same thing. And he was talking from Persia. He's no more last century, and you are talking of it now. So it is really amazing.
Thank you. Human emotions, you know, they hardly change.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's like Kalidasa and Tagore, they still
True.
resonate. I mean, you would have so many. For her, Kamala Das resonates, but somebody does,
Correct, correct, correct,
you know.
correct. True.
Thank you, Abhay, sir. You have well interpreted your poems and the meaning behind it, the emotions. So moving ahead, Mahua ma'am. So what your take on this?
I think it has already been said what I wanted to say. Emotional expression is, of course, of quintessential importance. We are kind of consumed, overwhelmed, inundated, and sometimes even exhilarated by emotions, and we let the emotions flow through our poetry, right? And as Abhay sir said, how beautifully we let that flow, how beautifully we can, with all poetic devices, we can do that. We can translate our emotions onto the paper. So that is what it is about, and it is a kind of catharsis. Poetry, as Wordsworth says, is spontaneous overflow of emotions, right? So poetry is a multisensory experience. It is the expression of a very strong feeling of emotions that are again poured onto the paper, and how well we do that, of course. Thus, it is not only the joy that the poets can communicate with their verses, but anything, sadness, despair, anguish, doubt, hatred, everything. They can communicate all the feelings and emotions that in general, a human being can experience, right? And I think the power of poetry lies in the condensation of language, which demonstrates an exceptionally high amount of skill and eloquence. And this again reminds me of Pythagoras. He had once said that music, is like mathematics. For it needs an exceedingly well precision. And I really believe that poetry is also the same. To me, poetry contains within it everything that one can, look for in a piece of writing. You talk of anything, form, structure, connection, and of course, above all, emotions. So the basic task of good poetry is to evoke your emotions and feelings. Yeah. So that again reminds me of a poem because Mitali ma'am was talking about the Ukrainian who was, I recently wrote a poem which was, published in Spill Words. I'll quickly read. It's a very short poem. So how you can evoke emotions through your poetry. I mean, I cried myself off to sleep for many nights. This war, impacted me so strongly. So one fine morning, I just wrote it down. Bombs blowing buildings, bombardments besmirching basements, babies and babushaks, bereaved barbarians, besurging birds, bruises, bleaks, bemoans, bellicose, basque, brawl, blurts, bro, bowed by boorish blasphemy, black backbone bends breath, screams to breathe but bleeds, bleeding baubles of belief, blinding and binding, billowing the bleached blue, black is the burial, and you ask me to write poetry. So, this is what emotions, poetry does. You can, evoke many kind of emotions through your poetry, and how well you do it is what makes a good poetry. Yeah.
I think it's also some amount of meditation that comes into a poem. Like yours has all these explosives of B, the onomatopoeic.
Yeah, I
of-
tried doing that. Yes.
Uh,
Because it's called breathless, so there's no punctuation in this poem. So yeah.
so I think to an extent, it's also that when you are writing, it has to consciously convey the intense emotion that you feel inside you.
True, of
you know.
course.
So,
Yes.
and for that, you need to work on the poem. Because if you just put
Of
down
course.
all your thoughts, it will be more like a prose piece, or maybe no piece. You can't read it. So, so it needs that honing, which is sometimes what beginners at times think they've written a poem and that's it. But that doesn't happen. You
That
need.
happens every day nowadays. I mean, everyone is writing
Oh
poems.
yeah,
So,
you
yeah.
have so many. It's like quite.
So
Tell
you
me
would know it
about it.
better, Mitali
I'll
ma'am.
tell you about it. I get submissions to
Yeah,
as
I
a
get that
sample.
completely.
Yes. Tell me about it. Yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone. So, my next question: does the role of emotions differ in Western English and Indian English poetry? So, please express your thoughts. So, I would like to start with Mitali, ma'am.
Okay. All poetry needs to touch hearts, Indian or Western.
Very
Okay. And I will give you an answer with a poem of mine, which had come out in Daily Star, I think 2-3 years ago, 2019. Daily Star is a newspaper in Bangladesh. It's like the Times of India of Bangladesh. So this is called Confused.
okay.
I am mixed up, cannot help. English and Bengali under my belt. I can read a bit of Hindi, cannot understand much of French. A little Chinese, low class, they said. I'm mixed up, cannot help. English and Bengali under my belt. I grew up thinking I will find a way, but now Pidgin is all that I can say. I write in English, the language borrowed from the West, the language that taught us or brought us unrest, the language that through the Raj spread, importing nationalism in its tread. I'm mixed up, cannot help, English and Bengali under my belt. But my life is that of the non-English, a Probashi Bengali at best. People say I'm not typical, not quite the right type. A mixed up Bengali, I said. Culture is something I dread at every tread, because culture I have is mine, not of a race, a country, or religion. Human being is the only race to which I belong. Help protect my home, the earth, its every drop, its every stone. In a world of 7.7 billion, can I be alone? I am mixed up, cannot help. English and Bengali under my belt. So it's a very personalized reaction, but Arundhati
Relate
talks
to that.
huh? Pardon?
I
Yeah.
said I can relate to that being a Probashi Bengali.
Yes. And Arundhati talks of it in her interview where she says she has no Tamil. And she has a poem called To the Welsh Critic, where she talks of this. Interestingly, she says here, this is Arundhati Subramaniam's interview. She says in her poem, I stammer through my Tamil and I long for a
Yes.
nirvana that is hermetic, odor-free, bottled in Switzerland.
Beautiful
So
poem.
she says, um, here, I grew up, okay. That English is the language she dreams in, expresses rage and grief in. So, there is nothing Western and Eastern for a language. Language is like a poet's color. So you pick any color that fits your emotional landscape and you paint with it. You paint it out. So that is exactly, I mean, you have even Tagore was heavily influenced by by a lot of Western stuff, music, poetry. I mean, Auld Lang Syne this season was translated to Purano Sei Diner Kotha.
Exactly.
The cultural landscape changed, but it was very much that. And though we have this interesting discussion between Aruna Chakravarty and, in this book, we have the discussion between Aruna Chakravarty and Sunil Gangopadhyay, the late Sunil Gangopadhyay, which took place at Kochi in the 150th Tagore birthday celebrations. So we got it out here. So what she talks of there is that that Tagore is actually, I mean, Aruna Chakravarty mentions that Tagore actually was so heavily influenced that he was, he was mixing all the genres. In fact, we have an essay also in this book by Debraj Mukherjee that talks of Tagore's, the way people impacted each other. If you want to be good, you can write in one language. But if you want to be great, you have to open up to the world and let all influences come to you. So when you have a poem coming to you using some words of this thing, it's pretty much might have been something like, I have a poem that was also in Daily Star at some point, which has a lot of French words. But that's because, it came naturally. I needed to use French there. So if you translate it to English or something, it may not have I felt would not have the same impact. So it's like using a dialect. So, this divide of East and West or Indian and Western I don't think holds. I mean, Abhay, Mahua, me, we all live in different places, and we are we Indian? Are we not Indian? That also is something I do not understand. We may not be by passport, but we are of Indian origin. So you move twice, you move thrice. I have lived in so many countries that I don't know how many countries have impacted me at the end of the day, even China, So to say that Indian and Western would be a division that I would find, very difficult to meet. And yes, Western poets do have emotions, and so do Indian poets. I mean, otherwise they can't write, they can't write. So that is all I can think of saying to this. Maybe Abhay can tell us more, or Mahua.
Thank you, Mitali ma'am. So Abhay sir, what's your take on this?
Well, I mean, you're saying that your question is that Indian English poetry has.
How does the role of emotion differs between the Western English poetry and the Indian English poetry?
Well, I think it's I mean, there is a difference, I have lived in, many countries, and including in the West. So I find that, particularly the poetry of the North, is gray and is more dark. I mean, in the sense, it has darker, it has a shade, and which also gets reflected in the clothes, and also in the overall, in paintings, in the overall outlook of life. And I mean, I wouldn't say much about Indian English poetry. I mean, but the poetry of Indian languages I find so vibrant. I have edited a book called 100 Great Indian Poems, which has poems from 28 Indian languages, and I find these poems just so rooted, which has the aroma and the smell and the color of the soil of India and the places from which these poems originate. And these poems are not only contemporary poems, but also it covers 3,000 years of Indian poetry. So it begins from Sanskrit and comes to English. So, so there is difference. The difference I mean, I think, and difference comes because of the surroundings, and the kind of issues we face. So, the issues in India particularly is, it's different than the poets feel in the developed countries. Uh, you have Finnish poetry, you have Norwegian poetry, you have I mean, I find they have a tinge of melancholy and dealing with existential issues, while in India poetry is more. I mean, it has the noise of the street. It has the bustle. It has the song of the bird. Mahua, you are a fan of. I mean, you have Kamala Das. I find her poems so vivid. She writes about her grandma, about snakes, about so every poet gets to write about one's surrounding, and surroundings do differ. I find poetry of the South very vibrant, particularly Africa actually, and Latin America. I've also translated from Portuguese actually, done a book called 60 Brazilian Poets, New Brazilian Poems, and translated 60 Brazilian poets. And I find Brazilian poetry, it does have the influence of the West because it was a colony, but there has been lots of intermingling, and there's a lot of Africa in Brazil actually. There's a lot of Africa in Latin America actually. So you have the carnival there. You have the so how I mean poetry is like any other art form, and it reflects in what surroundings it is written. Thank you.
But would the emotions vary, Abhay? I mean, the emotions that's what would be, like their response could vary, but it's all emotions in any case, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, Mitali, emotions are not the same, everywhere. I mean, we have different emotional responses to different things.
Yes.
So for example, if you, if you are from, even within India, I mean, you cannot say there's one Indian emotional experience.
Yes.
If you are in Punjab, I mean, your emotional. If you, Jyotsna, are you from Punjab? So I think you are on mute.
I'm from Delhi only.
You're from Delhi, right? But like the response to sarso, sarso ka jo phool hota hai na, sarso, I mean, the flowers of mustard is different in Punjab than it is in Bengal for sure. And it's a so what I'm trying to say is that we have, I mean, that there are universal, because we are human beings, there are universal emotions, feeling of love, feeling of sadness, feeling of but then there are also particularities. They are not the same, and the way
Yes.
we respond to chole bhature or like mach bhat is different than so I'm saying that it's just
Just to let you know.
well, I'm a vegetarian, but I'm just telling this thing to you.
I
So
understand what you're saying.
so it's different. So yeah, so that's what I'm saying, that West is a bit dark, because I have also edited an anthology called Capitals, which has 185 capital cities, and poets from all the, I mean, all across the planet actually have contributed to that anthology. And you can see, I mean, there's a section on Europe on that, and you can read that section, and there's a section on Africa, and you will find the difference.
Yes, I agree to that because I have also lived in the West and had the same experience that, I mean, you just look at the paintings, you look at a Rembrandt or you look at a Van Gogh, and you see the difference between that and maybe, Jamini Ray or MF Hussain or something, and you see the.
Correct. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. That I mean, there's a warmer. I mean, the South is more warm than the North.
Okay, that's very likely, I guess. I don't know much of the South.
Thank you, both of you. So over to you, Mahua ma'am.
Well, I do not think role of emotion differs, per se in Western and Indian poetry. I mean, Hindi poetry, as your question was. But yes, as Abhay sir said, I of course agree to that. Response to your social milieu, of course, differs. The way I feel for Rasgulla, you may not feel the same for it. So yes, of course. But yes, poetry has one language, the language of the soul, and it is bound to evoke myriad layers of emotions. Beside the fact that there are a few words and phrases that kind of mean something automatically to those belonging to Hindi-speaking culture or that particular area. For instance, the smell of the first rain on parched ground. We call it in a Hindi Sondhi Khushbu, right? So I don't think the English version for the same evokes such a tangible feeling, or Godhuli Vela, we call in Bengali. So, yeah, so I don't know how to translate this exactly, in order to have that kind of essence when you translate it in English. So I don't know, but the fact remains that no matter which language it is, poetry is a
All is blooming.
spontaneous. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, but then there are a few phrases and words which has a typically, which belongs to a certain language. You cannot completely translate. I mean, the essence, fades away. That's what I feel. So when I translate my Bengali poems or Rabindranath's Bengali poems, I have translated few of them. Few of the words and phrases, I keep it as it is, because I don't think that anybody for that matter can completely translate those words. So yeah. But again, the fact remains that no matter which language, poetry is a spontaneous overflow of emotions. And a poet tries to kind of combine several poetic techniques to kind of create a meaningful poem that is bound to evoke emotions in the reader. Of course, the trigger is different, as Abhay sir said. So yeah.
Thank you, Mahua ma'am. And I would say I would like to thank all of you that for joining us today. I had such a quite enriching session with all of you. And thank you. So I'm hoping that the audience have also enjoyed the same as much as I did today. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us here.
Thank you so much for
Thank
having
you
us.
so much.
I just want to say thank.
You're on
You
mute.
are on mute. You are on mute, sir.
Okay, I'm saying I want to say thank you with a poem called "When My Breath Becomes Air." When my breath becomes air, don't despair. Scatter my ashes somewhere on the earth. Don't care to build a shrine. Read my poems. I live in them. They are my home. Thank you.
We'll definitely read.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much.